Hello.
Hi, Roland.
Good morning. How are you today?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, cool. So I'm still trying to resolve this video issue because I think it's one of those Windows update nightmares. I
Yeah,
did a wonderful test run, and then this morning it just kind of bummed out. So,
yeah, it's technology. It's one of those things.
always my worst friend, and Mercury's in retrograde. So, even more so.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I don't think I mean, I feel it's not a must. I mean, it depends on the content and how you're going to depict the presentation. So it's really up to you and what you feel comfortable with going forward.
Yeah, so I do have slides, so there will be something to hold the screen, which will be okay. I think, it's just a little bit more engaging when you can see a face. It becomes a bit more conversational. And because I'm
Yeah.
dealing with like data, it might be nice. So what I'm trying to also do parallel is to see if I can just access another computer. But for now, if it doesn't work, it's cool. We can, do it this way.
Perfect, perfect. And do you have the poem and all of that?
Yes, I've got the poem. I saw in your email that you said that you would play it, but I mean, how would it work? Yeah.
Oh, so I mean, I sorry, apologies. It was a miscommunication. I thought I was going to be the host and you're the
Oh, we can
so
do
but
that. We can definitely do that if you prefer.
no, that's fine. Up to me. I just looked at the Zoom settings. Unfortunately, if you're panelist, we can't see your screen. So
Okay.
only the host
Okay.
video can go on. So rather, I keep that to your side of things. And then yes, essentially, if you're happy to play the poem and then take it from there, then I think that'll be grand.
Okay. I just wanted to test it. So maybe if you'll just give me a moment to share my screen and test that the poem plays.
Please. Perfect.
Okay, so let's see that. And
Perfect. Hello.
okay, so why is that not working there? And just want to get the poem, sorry.
Coding for Goku began when she sculpted grand dreams onto pottery, crocheted algorithmic patterns onto garments that we grew into. This was the original digital technology, a reflection of our artistic.
Okay, so you can hear it okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. So at least the microphone works. I wonder if I can just place it in.
Yes, that's all we need.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
all we
Okay, and then as I said, it will be less than an hour. From what I've seen thus far, there's only a few people registered. So we might even just end earlier, I think.
It's now 17. It has increased from 9,
Oh,
by the way.
okay. I didn't see that.
No. It just happened in the last 20 minutes or so.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so then it would be nice to have a chat, and I kind of end on an open-ended note for discussion. So.
Yes. Well, from my experience, we never do have time for these discussions to have meaningful discussions. So I think it's actually great that we have that period.
Okay.
So and a very relevant topic. So especially in Johannesburg. So I think it will be fine going forward.
Sure. Okay then. And is there anything else that I need to be aware of? You said you would be online, so I mean, I doubt they would run into any technical difficulties, but you have the expertise to deal with it.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, I have to be a host to live stream the event,
Oh,
but considering because of because I don't think you can make me a co-host. I don't
let's
think you
see.
can.
Let's see, maybe here, make co-host. Did you want rolling the yes? There you go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. So we're recording, so that's perfect. Now we can start. So when you're ready to start, let people in. I can do that now.
Okay, but we're starting in an hour, yeah?
Oh, is it? Wait.
It's 10.
Oh, what's the time now?
It's 9,
Oh, sorry.
no?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. That's why.
Yeah, you know what? I'm in South Africa at the moment. Now you're confusing me because you know, I know daylight savings has been happening. Oh my gosh, it's 10 in Johannesburg. My time is in Amsterdam. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna move. I'm gonna move now. So we can stop. Wow. Oh my goodness. What a day. Okay, just give me 2 minutes while I look at my notes and then we can start letting in.
No rush, okay?
What a joke.
No. I know. I can relate to your experience.
Yeah, I actually just flew back to South Africa, so I'm a little all over the place. Okay. So you want me to just press start, correct?
Well, we could do start, but you want to get the screen, yes, and then when you're ready, and then we can start.
Could you maybe play the poem so that I don't lose the holding screen?
Of course.
Okay, great. Start webinar.
Kindly just let me know when it's playing the play the poem, please.
Okay, so I've started the webinar.
Perfect. Shaakira?
Yeah.
Could you kindly put on this on your slides, please?
Is it not on?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, hold on for me. Is that good, Roland?
Perfect. We'll give it, I think, just a few more minutes before we start.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect, Shaakira. I'm going to start. Thank you all for joining us today. First, we're going to start to play our poem to start this week. This is something we've been doing part of the Urban Festival month around the theme Empowering the Civic.
The foundation of our house was built on an anthem. The anthem was a prayer our heart rendered in the language of silence. The rooms reflect our hearts, with no light, no warmth. The floors balance the stones our souls carry. Flowers withered by bitter breath. Cold crawls over us and nibbles at our seams. We never knew lack until poverty found residency in our mouths. Despondency has been rattling the door's hinges. Notwithstanding that, tonight we're hosting a dinner to find out how we got here, how we have come to this house, come I see you, to further life or to end it. Who bribed us into deserting our lifeline? We asked all and sundry to come dine with us, a night that stretched for 26 years. We served organic suggestions that night, topped with rhetorical questions. These guests are not here to eat the plight of our life's stories, to hear how we are not living to go to heaven, but not look at every meal as though it's the Last Supper. We all keep glancing at equality with faint smiles, trying to ignore how we became victimized by the spoils of the struggle. No one often reminds the once oppressed how tyrannical giants fall. So when fortune favors them, greed has them inflating, bursting beyond their bellies. Illusions of democracy attempt to open my mouth, but reality has this tongue feeling like a severed limb. There are gaps in this conversation of intellectual liberation that have our voices shifting as tectonic plates. Until for the time uttered his only words that evening, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Abruptly, labor shouted to capitalism. This forged, long-run romance between us and progress is no longer glue that keeps this house together. We have redefined moral hazards, dealt a hand to hedge everything but the people. With a smile, capitalism retorted, don't feed on what you can't fund. The futurist put on his contact lens to comment. This house is on fire. All present are flooding it with emptiness, trenching every space with blood clots to save its foundation. Tip the scales. Sorrow has assaulted your lungs for far too long. Deflate into a readiness to flow. Teach the mind so the heart may preserve its lessons. Our minds are gifts. Earth acknowledges our presence. And so the next day, we spring cleaned, dusted off distrust, washed the years of betrayal off the walls, washed inequality off our skin, watched injustice flow out the baths, and see it drain stagnation's throat. To hear our own esophagus emphasize the echo of victories our stomachs are yet to clasp. Soak ourselves in knowledge from Urban Festival 2020, embracing our best ideals which await in plenty. We will refurnish every room with a lived experience, embedded in the site of memory, not yet some of us.
Thank you for tuning in. That was a poem by Emma Maybe titled Unraveling. I think it's a very beautiful way to start. I'll now turn over to Shaakira Cohen, an urban change maker, a development specialist, and most importantly, humanist and South African, to speak about empowering the civic around human-centric design in Johannesburg. Over to you, Shaakira. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roland, and good morning, everyone. As Murphy and Mercury retrograde would have it, we are having some technical difficulties, so you're not going to see my video this morning. I could be coming to you from bed in my pajamas, but you'll never know. So I hope that this does not disrupt the conversation, and I hope that we can still engage meaningfully. My name is Shaakira Chohan, and I have been thinking about inequality for a really long time. I grew up in a marginalized community on the edges of Johannesburg. And so from a very early age, I became aware, whether subconsciously or not, that there was no level playing field for everyone, that not everyone is dealt a fair start to that opportunity. And this same thought or awareness came to mind in trying to find solutions around a research that I undertook around both resilience, which started essentially from a climate resilience perspective, but then very quickly developed into resilience for communities. Today, I'm going to share the findings of that research and share insights into how we might approach resilience and building resilient cities from a human-centered perspective. So upon reflecting on this concept of resilience and its related ideas or concepts of vulnerability, I realize, as we know, that the most vulnerable in our communities are also the most threatened, with the most unequal distribution of that vulnerability. The urgency to address resilience in our cities could not be more pertinent. The challenges and the risks that global cities are facing are compounding. In addition to rapid urbanization, we have issues around migration, inequality, poverty, infrastructure, climate change. And in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly South Africa, additional risks in the form of unemployment, high crime and violence, substance abuse, poor health systems, fragmentation, poor services, and infrastructure. And so really there emerges not only an unequal distribution of this vulnerability, but also a rather complex profile, a profile that is multifaceted, it's intertwined, and most importantly, it's continuous. Our vulnerable communities face multiple stresses perpetually and daily, and some of them, or most of them, rather severe. So in thinking about resilience for our cities, it really urges a more transformative developmental approach that acknowledges this complex vulnerability profile and seeks to, rather than just responding to a shock or one isolated incident, seeks continual adaptation to a never-ending disturbance. We're really talking about systemic vulnerability in our communities. And in Johannesburg, that's more than half of our population of this economic heart of South Africa. So how then do we think about building resilience for such communities? I believe that understanding how a practical application of resilience in these contexts and at community scale provides opportunities to not only build a more resilient city at large, but also to save lives. Resilience here, facing intersecting challenges, needs to be tackled alongside other interconnected developmental challenges and priorities, and it needs to tackle deeper systemic causes of the vulnerability. I'm saying we need to consider it more as a long-term goal rather than something that we achieve. An approach that will acknowledge the local needs while also unlocking potential for social transformation. And this is really contextualized at the community scale. How do we do this? By shifting firstly our focus from lack to strength base, and by placing a deeper focus on building the capacity of urban systems to be able to adapt continuously and proactively, and then be able to adjust and self-organize in relation to any changes. And this is really done using the skills, the capacities, and the opportunities that already exist within a community. There are three components of community resilience framed through this lens. Firstly, capacity building, which really represents the community's ability to access, engage, and develop their resources, to invest these resources, and then translate them into community capital. Secondly, taking action, with this increased capacitation, which is driven by active agents taking collective or strategic action. And finally, the importance of transformation, emphasizing a viable continuity for communities in context of continual change. Most importantly, how do we really think about resilience within the context of cities and communities as strong social, non-deterministic systems? And herein lies the opportunity, I would say, rather than the challenge for our cities. I'm talking about resilience building rather than resilience achieving, or resilience building rather than just the management of a system. So perhaps we've all heard this in various ways or in some form or the other. Capacity building at a community scale is not a new idea. But what does it really mean to shift to a strength-based focus? And how can we really plan for continuity and sustained resilience in such complex contexts? We have to firstly recognize that there's an inherent dynamic of power at play within cities. And we have to understand that there's cause and effect in relation to that. And here in the research positions human agency as such a domain which holds such a recognition, and it provides an opportunity to strengthen a community beyond their immediate development needs, to enable them to act, to self-organize, and to thrive within both their personal lives and their personal environments. It holds an opportunity to build a community's ability to transform their lives despite facing multiple stresses. So instead of bouncing back from a shock, disturbance, or a stressor, how can we move to a more proactive response? An opportunity lies at this intersection of human and urban development. Human agency as the ability to make choices from free will and develop the ability to act in order to create the capacity to continue. By adopting a human-centered approach, the human development discourse offers insight into how we can build adaptive capacity, emphasizing the more social components of adaptation, such as connections, relationships, behavior, and networks, all of which increase an individual or collective capacity to adapt to change. Here again, agency is connected to ideas on action and ability, on influence and innovation. The ability to influence relates to the capacity to challenge power relations and to contribute to change and transformation, and thus effect an outcome. It has impact on the ability to access decision-making processes and authority-making bodies. The ability to act is understood as conscious acts that is driven by either an individual or collective. It is enabled through participation or independent initiation that then produces positive effects. And finally, innovation relates to the human ability to imagine, to adapt or create new ideas and methods as solutions to meet needs or challenges. And it results in an improvement of an outcome, a process, or a condition. So what can we achieve when we work at this intersection of human and urban development? Well, my studies show that integrating a human and urban development approach to resilience through two key states or feelings, namely hope and connection, can increase a community resilience by up to 1,200%. That's really massive, right? And it's not just good sentiment, it's actually been proven to be good practice. So before I lose you in the emotion, I'm going to show you exactly what that meant for a small community in Soweto in Johannesburg, where we found correlative impacts of developing an ability to act in the community and their transformative self-development of capacity to not only continue, but change the course of their lives proactively. This is the case of Noordgesig in Soweto. These are extracts from interviews and data that was extracted from the citizens, which really capture the essence of the descriptive values attached to the place. Perhaps Noordgesig is not the most vulnerable community in Johannesburg, but it gives us a good idea of the compounding issues that exist in our communities. And what we see here predominantly is a disconnection, a sense of hopelessness, disempowerment, a sense of feeling abandoned, neglected, and a very strong focus on the lack. These were all attributed to the issues that are facing to the community, issues around violence, gender-based violence, substance abuse, poor health, poverty, unemployment. One thing that is really interesting that emerged from the data collection were two assets that were named by the citizens, and that was the people of Noordgesig and the heritage of the area. So a project was undertaken at a local government level. It was an urban development project as part of the initial Corridors of Freedom program. But what happened is we instituted slight shifts within the institutional instruments and interactions. And what was achieved went beyond the development goals of the project and emerged some insightful lessons on human-centered approaches to resilient cities. The approach was rather closer to design thinking approach, where we used a process of discovery, building from the inside out, rather than prescriptive project brief and project methodology. The focus of this entire urban festival has been about empowering the civic, and there have been some really rich discussions about the many pathways to achieve this. But how do we then develop a strategic approach of building resilience? How did we build agency in this community? I'm not going to go into the detail of that process. I think the audience here is very familiar with the ideas around these kind of processes. But what we did find, and what is important to highlight here, is that institutional conditions played a pivotal role. It's an important part of resilience building. An important part is to define a robust and flexible system, to have highly capacitated agents, which in this case is the local community, and to support that with enabling institutions, in this case, local government agency. So we have all heard about co-creation, participatory planning, communicative planning. We've understood the benefits, but the challenge here, and for it to be really effective, is to do it wholeheartedly, intentionally, and contextually. Here, a range of institutional conditions was slightly altered and designed in a way that shifted the focus to capacity building and sustainable continuity of the community itself beyond the built products, which was a new library, social plaza, public environment upgrades, and a host of placemaking initiatives. It should be noted as well, besides the fact that resilience was not one of the project objectives or specific objectives, that this was also all achieved within the allocated budget and time, which I think is really important in our context, because it always comes up about within this discussion around how to achieve such change with the limitations on our resources. What we see here is that where maximum impact can be gleaned by making small adjustments to our approaches, our instruments, and our interactions. There were three pathways to achieving it in this project. We used creative, integrated visions and plans. We used partnerships across sectors and accelerated innovation. A fourth pathway, which I think is really important and which I hope that this entire discussion will leverage a debate on, is policy instruments. Informal conduct, behavior, and conventional tools were changed, and they were custom designed to focus on empowerment and enablement of the community. And this was really to unfold and extract the solution rather than predetermine it. The tools that we used in the procedures and the structures were about shaping, they were about stimulating, and again, capacity building. There were two key instruments that were noted from the citizens and the experts that were involved in the project as having been the key instruments to unlocking the potential, and that was communication and knowledge share. These were cited as being fundamental to the community feeling heard and included. One distinction that occurs that we can see from this word cloud extracted from the data that was gathered through the process is that the placement of people and community lies at the center, which is a really important aspect of how we develop human agency. The process encouraged a sense of involvement, a sense of empowerment, and in so doing allowed the community to be recognized and considered, and that played a pivotal role in establishing the sense of ownership or connection for the community. The results, this is a co-occurrence table showing components of community resilience in the green and human agency in the orange. And what we're seeing here is that actually multiple relations between human agency and community resilience emerged, and some around very specific characteristics. I've highlighted the top 5 co-occurrences for ease of legibility. What these findings suggest is a transformative and an integrated approach to building resilient cities. And it really holds enticing proposals for future policy making in the domain, which integrates or considers integrating strands of knowledge from both urban and human development, from both technical and social or soft skills. For example, just by having access to influence processes, the community built the overall capital by becoming actively engaged and collectively aligned, which is really important when we look at the quotes on the left-hand side of the screen. It becomes really important around aspects of ownerships and sustainability of the projects and the community. What we see is that not only psychological or socio-cognitive dimensions of the community being enhanced, but also a move from a community which initially felt that everything had to be carried out by government to now taking ownership to the urban management of their space, sustaining the public environment, ensuring safety, ensuring legibility of their environment. And that final quote really gives us a powerful message about the pathway to feeling that drive to create change. We felt great, we felt important, we knew we were considered. This ability to participate and influence resulted in a renewed sense of hope in the community, a desire to empower themselves and their livelihood. According to the co-occurrences found, being empowered or having a perceived sense of control over their lives was the factor that most enhanced action and participation in the community, unlocking this fascinating network of correlative actions and capacity building. What we found was a reinforcing relationship between the ability to influence and the ability to act, an improvement in the enthusiasm to get involved in community matters, a positive effects on conscious involvement and independent initiation of action towards personal or collective benefit. A new desire, I should emphasize, for change, a new sense of pride and spirit of empowering each other. Most importantly, the sense of ownership that seems to have been developed has been linked to as always stemming from just having the ability to influence. The quote on the right-hand side of the screen, though dense, again highlights some really important factors about the changes that were witnessed in the community after this process and project. People became more self-efficient, more knowledgeable, which led to them becoming wanting to get more personally involved, wanting to sustain their community, enhance the beauty of that community, as well as the identity of the community. And then again, that shift from reliance or dependence solely on authorities or local government to instate change to improve lives, now a connection to the area and a connection to neighboring communities in an attempt to try and think about urban development on a broader city level, which for those that know the context of Johannesburg or even South Africa is amazing and a really big shift away from that isolated thinking of my neighborhood or my yard. The increase in independent action is found across physical, environmental, social, and economic aspects. Most notably for discussing response to shock, perhaps, and resilience within that framing, what was really interesting was the community's response to COVID. For example, they mobilized, facilitated, and distributed an entire feeding scheme, which was said to be more effective than any governmental process and reached a significant number of the population. In addition, they have established external connections and partnerships, a notable one being a partnership that has been established with ER24, the Emergency Response Organization, and a local fire that took place in a home was managed, it was addressed, and it was resolved solely by the community. So it really, we're starting to see this massive enablement of the ability of the community to act independently, to create change, and to create this change beyond one project or one developmental agenda. And then in terms of transformation, an impact on the community's adaptation processes, hope, will, and the ability to move forward, to create change, a motivation, a desire for growth, and even an increased trust in government and authorities. A sense of power of the community and of self. And there was a unanimous perception from the community that their behavior is more positive, more hopeful, and more strong. So this is an illustration of the changes of the descriptive values of human agency from before the NOC project to after. And of course, it's quite clear that we moved from a very low level of agency to a significantly larger value, particularly in the areas of the ability to influence and the ability to act. So what did that translate into, or how did that have an effect on the community's resilience? We found the most impact came through in terms of their capacitation, the development of their community resources, the engagement thereof, and the translation into community capitals. Capacitation is also the most important aspect of community resilience. And from this diagram, we see not only positive impacts, but again, strongly reinforcing relationships, suggesting an associative effect. The community's financial, social, and physical resources were positively developed, both individually and on a collective level. Some 107 new resources were developed. Those included economic opportunities, informal networks, built interventions, environmental conditions. And it was really exciting to also note the innovation that were attached to these interventions. For example, when we started this project, we started off by asking the broader community a very simple question, and that was, what do you want? And the limitations on accessing their power and their ability to dream and imagine was reflected in their answers, where they simply asked for things like, could you fix the potholes? Could you change the light bulb on the street lights? Like really simple things. And yet in the new interventions created following the enablement and development of agency, the community is now looking at hydroponic farming. They've developed a robust non-motorized transport services system. They're also looking at a larger scale wetland restoration project. They facilitated heritage and tourism initiatives and are building both on the identity and on the heritage, which I think is extremely meaningful when we think about the layers of resilience required, especially the criticality of climate resilience facing these communities and the elements of sustainable development that are needed in these areas. I hope that this is legible. It's basically showing us that developing these community resources and then engaging them and transforming them into capital yielded enriching benefits that went beyond the project. And again, revealing these interesting insights into how these relationships of reinforcement were established. Here we see a diagram of the co-occurrences that took place with development of community resources, which is sort of in the second row of little boxes. And what we're seeing here is that it's linked to autonomous action, which then occurs with inspiring more action and more participation to take increased collective action and transform it into capitals. Development of resources also co-occurs with empowerment, which shows the importance again of having this ability to influence and the associative effect on shaping one's socio-economic life. The development of resources also relates to strong adaptation processes and an improved outlook on life. This underlying sense of ownership and hope and connection has impact on neighboring codes, revealing rich relationships between action and other components of community resilience and human agency. It is important, it gives us important clues about understanding the impact that agency can actually have on a community and its resilience, just through the creation of active agents of change. What is also really interesting is that every characteristic of human agency, again, those are the orange tags, was associated to at least one community resilience component, meaning it had had an effect on at least one component of resilience, and there's a connection between the two. Additionally, components of community resilience reinforce each other, thereby increasing the combined effect and the combined capacity and action to continue, and even, as we've seen, to innovate. So really rich, complex relationships, but also a profound impact on the community's resilience. And again, that did not even form part of the project objectives or goals. Here we see the changes in the values of community resilience from before the NSC project to after. Of course, as mentioned, capacity building seemed to have been impacted the most, where there were minimal local businesses, minimal groupings of networking, and a very poor built infrastructure. Now, economic opportunities improved by 320%. Networking, which deals with solving the issues or addressing the issues facing the community, improved by 900%. And again, as well, physical built intervention improvement was quite significant. We see a change or a move from a really low participation or enthusiasm in the community to increased participation, improved social capital and social and solidarity, improved external connections that were made to strengthen the internal groupings, and just a general increased initiative for collective good and resourcefulness. We see a change in terms of their capitals from divided in their efforts and being divided as a community, having a lack of trust towards politicians and government officials, to a described improvement in interpersonal relationships and shared values. The community now works towards collective support in a co-beneficial way. There have been improvement in their successes, in their expression of needs, in their sense of belonging, in their ability to influence government officials, and their improved trust in those authorities. In terms of action, we now have a move from a heavy reliance on government and politicians for any action, for any change, and this perception of dormancy, to a sense of ownership, belief in the ability to inspire and effect change from within oneself, belief in the ability to protect and impact the community at large, and less reliance on government to effect change. The projects that are currently being run or proposed by the community, and some of them are quite a significant scale, are all being led by the community. They seek partnerships from government players, but largely it has been driven by active agents. We also see a move from a lack of community leadership and a division along religious and political lines to improved effectiveness of the community leadership and the ability to address their issues. And then finally, in terms of equity, where there was poor access to educational and safe spaces for vulnerable groups, there now is an improvement. Where there was little to no inclusion of women, elderly, and children's voices in projects, now that we see a positive increase in their inclusion, including work opportunities for women, which was cited as quite a significant factor considering the demographics of the area. So that is all great. It's now there's tangible evidence. We know what we have to do, but how does it work? How does this fit? What are we supposed to do with it, right? I think this is the most exciting part for me, because now we've got a foundation of some really rich empirical evidence of the value of this. And we need to start looking at what are those suggestions now for policy and for practice. How can we include more socio-cognitive dimensions of analysis in our cities, a more integrated and human-centered approach to understanding, managing, and responding to change? How can we establish a strength within communities that will facilitate resilience as and when it is needed, especially in these contexts of a complex, multifaceted vulnerability profile? The findings are really highlighting the importance of nurturing this relationship between institution and actors. We've seen that the institutional conditions are the link between the system and the actors. So how can we really dig into that? What is the role of trust in our public institutions in South Africa? How do we genuinely consider well-being as part of the resilience discussion? And then in terms of decentralizing urban governance, management, and development, how can we look at this in a transformative way that supports long-term sustainability of places? The role of and the power of local level policymaking is positioned rather advantageously here to drive contextual municipal change. And in South Africa, where local government has that legislative and executive jurisdiction to develop and implement policies, the emphasis needs to be focused and shifted to developing the institutional capacity, the skills, and the expertise to drive such a transformative approach. By doing this, we have an opportunity to work across and solve across SDGs, which again, in these contexts, beyond just South Africa, but in Sub-Saharan Africa as well, is so critically important right now. Human agency can be attributed to playing a central role to building resilience. More so, it can be said to contribute to a type of resilience. And this is where we can shift our focus. In a country and a global world that is facing all this trauma, this loss, these crises, these compounding difficulties that we can no longer ignore, I would say, we need to be custodians of hope and wholeness now more than ever. We need to reconnect our cities socially, because cities are people and people are cities. I believe that all it will take is to recognize the power of the people. And together, we may be able to grow a foundation of being able to thrive in times of crises, in times of change and transitions. We may actually be able to grow a living, resilient city. Thank you. So there's quite a bit of...
That was a great presentation. There's already a few questions. I would implore anyone in the chat to ask any questions or even put any general comments down. Sorry about the technical difficulties in the video. That's my fault. Apologies. But I guess one of the first questions is Amira Osman is saying, so inclusion leads to ownership and action. Has this reflected in the space and buildings or in other tangible ways? And could it work the other way around? And he mentions, could interventions be considered as catalysts that create trust and build a community and generate similar benefits?
Yes, thanks, Amira, for that wonderful question. I believe it can. So firstly, it has been reflected in the spaces and the buildings. As I mentioned, there was the built interventions or the physical environment improved by 1,200% following the project. And that's a combination of the projects that were implemented by local government, but also what we saw through that sense of ownership, through that sense of connection, people started improving their own personal space. They started taking initiative in terms of their street. They started forming things like street networks, connecting these, street committees, connecting these committees toward councillors and improving the urban development agenda and management around these areas. And continuing still, proposals around very tangible built physical spaces. As I mentioned, earlier, the hydroponics is a physical intervention that they're looking at. They're also looking at a larger sports development, which latches onto the heritage aspect of this area, being very involved in sport and particularly soccer. And what they've done, again, is to connect these now ideas about how they can build a community to external partners to see how can they source funding, which is really a big move when you think about how these communities typically wait for government to come to them. And just to then circle back to the could it work the other way around? Could interventions be considered as catalysts? Absolutely. The data extracted through the process reveals that the citizens felt suddenly, by improving the physical environment through the local government agency, they were being recognized. They used phrases such as the library that was built, for example. They named it state-of-the-art building, something that you would only find in Sandton. And if I can recall from the data collection process, they then went on to say that, like, this is wonderful. We now bringing people from neighboring communities, our families, our friends who left Noordgesig to say, come and see, look at what we have, look at what we are now. So I do think that there is a reciprocal and associative effect. And I think that that's the importance of not having this very strict timeline, that it needs to be a fluid and organic process. And I hope that answers your question.
I have a question, but Zendra Companion has a question that kind of is a nice little segue into us as planning practitioners and policymakers. Zendra asks, you mentioned that we're all understanding the value of human-centered design, but is this your experience that professionals, I refer meaning to people in practice and planning, local and provincial government, but is this your experience that on projects teams can understand the value of co-creation and human-centered design? And if not, how do we bring them around to understanding this value? Excellent question.
Yeah, I do agree. It's a wonderful question and very pertinent. And I would say that that understanding is not fully there. And I think this is why it is so important to share the results of these processes when they happen, and why it's so exciting to now see it being supported with empirical evidence, right, which is showing the value of human solutions rather than our science-laden approaches. In this particular case, I would say I mentioned that there's three things that I believe have to take place. It has to be done wholeheartedly, it has to be done intentionally, and it has to be done contextually. And I think that's the first step, because if you just set out with the intention, which is what we did with this project, we had a wonderful professional team that really came on board from the beginning, knowing that we were going to try and deviate slightly from the processes, but still staying within our budget and our time. Our intention from the beginning was to enable the community, to listen, to just let them feel heard, right? And I think that what gets lost in our processes, I mean, we know about co-production. We know that participatory planning forms part of all of our planning frameworks and policy. However, we're still approaching it as a tick box kind of solution, right? Had a meeting, tick. Had a meeting with more than 2 stakeholders, tick. It's just not enough, right? It's just not engaging. It's just not authentic. In this case, what we did is we expanded that. We first looked at every actor in the place. We engaged with schools, which was a first for any kind of project at this scale. We engaged with the business sector. We did drive-throughs through the community. We just let the community tell us their story. And in so doing, the process, though it had a strong focus of empowerment at the beginning, it unfolded as we went along with this community. I think that understanding what human-centered design means is intrinsic to designing the methodology. It does not just mean holding a participatory meeting, right? It does not just mean showing a community plans and helping or getting them to map out where they live and where they walk. It means putting them at the center. It means allowing their voice to dominate any agenda that you may have. Of course, staying within the constraints, the developmental agendas of the city, the broader city, and the intention of the urban development project. I think it's really important that we share these insights. I think that we need to share more widely, and that is why I am trying to advocate that we bring in different domains. Here we're working actually in the domain of urban development, urban studies, and psychology, right? And it's important because we're dealing with humans. We're actually dealing with people who come not only with their own stories, but their own background traumas, especially in South Africa. I think that that's extremely relevant. This community felt historically left out. They felt unrecognized. Their big brother, Orlando, gets a lot of attention around their role in the history of South Africa. And yet this community sheltered the students in the 1976 riots. Yet Mandela actually spent time in this community. Winnie also spent time in this community. The women of this community were at the forefront of the struggle for freedom. So to recognize them, to extract that value, I think is to be authentic. And the more we speak about it, the more we break away from the isolated silo working, not only in domains, but also in our departments. I believe we should have community development, social development, development planning, all coming together. I think environment needs to be in there. I think the conversation needs to be cross-sectional. It needs to be diverse and engaging. And we need to look at solutions holistically.
Great. I mean, deliberative planning shouldn't be a form of tokenism. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise, as you rightfully put. Next question is from Espen Nyanda that talks about, how do we see the role of the private development within this space? Adding, can there be a positive add-on to the public/civic intervention, or even potentially a larger scale above Noordgesig in the broader Johannesburg or Gauteng metropolitan area?
Yeah, I think that's also a really valid question, especially again in the context of South Africa, where everything cannot be done within one development space. I can give you an example within this project. What we did do is to facilitate. So beyond urban development, I think urban facilitation is extremely important as well. We facilitated the addition of private development through the in-state of services. So as part of the broader planning for the area, we started to think about where there were open spaces, where there was a need. One of the things that really came out was the need for housing. Where were the opportunities for retail, which is also another big factor. We met with partners right up front from the planning stage. And again, this idea of a multi-layered and I would say at different scales of engagement needs to happen. So we weren't just engaging with the community itself. We were engaging with government departments. We were also engaging with the private sector. We then identified land that could be potential areas for development, and we supported them from the government perspective by instating the infrastructure and the services that are needed, which eases the facilitation of private sector contribution. I think it's really important that we create those partnerships because, again, when we think about sustainability and continuity, not just in this context, but at a broader scale, it can only work with partnerships, and it can only work between that mix. And PPPs have been found to be extremely impactful and effective in doing this. So At the moment, what has happened since in terms of private development, again, initiated from the community, there have been new retail outlets that have been established, new businesses that have been established, some new housing developments are on the cards. And as I said, this whole hydroponic farming initiative is a private development as well. I hope that answers your question too.
Collaboration is essential, isn't it? Across all stakeholders. A very important question from Amira again. Where can we read more about this?
It depends which aspects you want to read about. I do have, this is obviously extracted from a dissertation that I completed recently. If you can reach out to me, I'm happy to share that. It is going to be published though, so maybe just wait a little bit and then it will be available most likely in the Urban Studies Journal. It would be an abridged version, but if there's any other information, everyone can reach out to me. My details, I think, are still on the screen. If you do a Google search, you'll probably find a lot of information of me talking about this, because I am very attached to this process and project. There's a YouTube video that you can find. It's called the Noordgesig Social Cluster Project. That video was made at the outset of this project, and it was really just to describe the processes that we did, and will give you a bit of a more insight as to how we rolled out the co-creation process. And I see that there's a question here from Sauda. Can you expand on the capacity building process? As I mentioned, it followed the co-creation process, but if you'd like to see more, I would encourage you to watch that YouTube video, and you would get a good sense of how exactly we engaged with the community.
Perfect. Any more questions? We do have, unfortunately, we have 4 minutes left. Any more questions or any more comments? Please put them down now. If no, in the meantime, I have a question to you. You spoke about climate resilience. Could you, obviously a big barrier is that, environmental gentrification. So it's great to see that climate resilience is not just discussed in a more informal, but also in a formal sense. How can, do you think that's very important for South Africa going forward, especially as more people are going in cities, climate resilience and food adaptation and all these very important, steps to prepare our communities for climate change and the biodiversity crisis?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, this research started on looking at climate resilience. It formed part of my specialization around climate change and urban environments. But when I started thinking about it, I realized that though really critical, I would say, in our context, it's still right at the back of our heads. And the reason is because of these daily perpetual stresses, right? Like, people are just trying to survive. People are just trying to stay safe, to walk home safely at night, to make ends meet. They cannot see and they cannot comprehend the scale or the impact of climate change and the importance of climate resilience. More especially again in South Africa, but in Johannesburg, where we are situated in a previous mining community. Most of our vulnerable communities are in our most vulnerable areas, right? They're surrounded by mine dumps. There's high levels of uranium in the air. The soil is in really poor state. The wetlands need significant restoration. And so, though they might not see it, I think we are already in the red, right? Like, I think that we have so many issues to tackle. And I don't know if we're taking the approach to dealing with our climate resilience as actively as we should. I'm wondering, I'm always thinking about how much of it is still at the level of policy discussions, at the level of, green bonds. We need to actually transform on the ground before it's too late. I read something recently about the water situation and the seriousness of the water situation in South Africa, and we see this already. We see our communities in Alex and so forth really being impacted. And so what I'm hoping to do now, there was a little quote that I had from the citizens, this one here. And I thought I put it there because it really like hit something in me, where the citizens said that your efforts have truly healed a heart. I thought that was just so powerful, right? In terms of just understanding the power of what this can do. So the intention is to, again, go back and share the findings and share the results and extrapolate what this means for the community, but then to move the conversation very quickly to climate change and climate resilience, because these are the communities that are already going to be affected quite significantly. The hydroponic initiatives, was really exciting to see them undertaking this without any instigation from external people. Just something that they've been thinking about. And actually, urban farming in this community is something that has been done historically by a lady who passed away during this process, called Mama Glover. And so then again, there's these aspects of indigenous practices, which are already so strongly tied to sustainable use and practice of our land, which has been lost and sort of fallen under the heaviness of all of the daily chaos that they are facing. So I really hope that by showing and sharing the value of what this process can do, and by taking it back to the community and helping them understand that they actually did always have the power, that we can then expand that conversation to how can we build a climate resilience.
And wow, that's a great answer. You know, tapping into indigenous knowledge. We're not reinventing the wheel. It's about community and creating ownership to adaptation, mitigation, or these bigger things that will, like we said, will affecting communities now, but through an equity lens as well. Wow. Any more questions? I know it is not 8 o'clock, sorry, it is 11 o'clock South African time. I did post a link. Is that the correct link to the Noordgesig project?
I can't check it right now, but can I encourage people just to note my email address? And if there is any issues, just email me and I will respond as soon as I can and try and send you as much content as I can as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This session is being recorded, so it will be uploaded to the South African Cities Network YouTube page. And yes, please reach out to Shaakira. And also, there is more events part of the Urban Festival month. So please, if you haven't, have a look on their website. Again, the theme is around empowering the civic, and it's very important as we kind of planning towards a new COVID normal. In a way, how do we not replace one crisis with another crisis? That sense pre-COVID times. Thank you very much, and hope to see everyone very soon.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.